watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
On Monday this week, Congressman Rodney Davis came to town, bringing with him the third-ranking Republican in Congress, Liz Cheney from Wyoming. She's the daughter of Vice President Dick Cheney, and they held a fundraiser together on Monday night.
I get asked a lot, what do you think as a Republican with the fact that you have many fewer women in your conference today than you ever have? And I like to remind people that it's Nancy Pelosi who in many cases spent millions of dollars to elect a male Democrat over female Republicans in these swing districts.
And joining us now is the woman who's trying to unseat Congressman Davis in 2020, Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan. Good to have you back with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I had you a few times in 2018 and have you back now. I want to give you a chance to respond to Congressman Davis there, his insinuation or his statement that Speaker Nancy Pelosi is to blame for a shrinking number of women in the Republican Party in Congress.
Yeah, I saw the video. I mean, bless his heart. Trying to blame Democratic women for the lack of Republican women elected last cycle is a big stretch. And I think that what they really need to do is look at their policies. You know, when you have a party that is so intent on, say, repealing the ACA and putting us back into the dark ages where being a woman becomes a pre-existing condition again. Those are the issues that they have as a party. It's not Democrats' fault.
He does, so I'm glad to hear that you're saying you want to focus on the issues, and
yeah,
I think a lot of people in the 13th want to hear a policy debate about that. But if Congressman Davis were here, he would say, hang on a minute, that's not a fair characterization of my position, because he says he does support coverage for pre-existing conditions. He just doesn't like the way Democrats want to come at it through Obamacare or through other alternatives. He wants to, I guess, get at that a different way.
His words and his actions just don't match up when we're talking about health care. And the facts are that he has voted again and again to repeal the ACA, to gut protections for people with pre-existing conditions. He just voted again recently against protecting people with pre-existing conditions. He has done it time and again, and his words are empty.
The Republicans, specifically the National Republican Congressional Committee, which is a big political firm, they've already started targeting you with a few different labels in a sort of Trumpian fashion, I think, insulting you as a, quote, socialist loser. I saw your response to the State Journal Register and Bernie Schoenberg a few weeks ago when that came out. Do you, just because that was floated out there, do you consider yourself a socialist?
Absolutely not. And name calling and, and nastiness like that is not what people in the 13th Congressional District want. The reason that people across the district are coming out to support me again is because they know I want to go to Washington for them. I want to fix our health care system. I want to make sure that we have jobs coming back to the district. I want to help them get their kids to a good school. And these are the issues that we talk about on the campaign trail, and that's what I'm going to continue to focus on, not the partisan name calling, which is ridiculous.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who the daughter of Dick Cheney, the former vice president, was with Congressman Davis this week. She's a Republican from Wyoming, and she was helping him raise money and talking about women in leadership in Congress. And she mentioned people like you specifically. One of the lines you just gave about bringing jobs back to the 13th, she goes, look, a lot of Democrats ran on that promise. Some of them won to boost the economy, pro-growth. But in winning, they empowered Speaker Pelosi and they empowered this sort of radical left wing of the party, the AOC wing, I think Congresswoman Cheney was referring to, saying that some of the socialists, the growing number of socialists in the Democratic Party, are now more empowered because Democrats have won seats. So I guess my question to you, how would you contrast or how would you interact with people like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez once you got to Congress to rebuff them, to compete with their ideas? How would you address that movement in the Democratic Party that wants to go farther left than maybe you're comfortable going?
Sure. Well, look, people in central Illinois want a representative who represents them and their interests. And so what does that mean? It means that when I go to Congress, I am going to be focused on education and making sure that we have affordable education, that we have, good workforce training. These are the issues that people talk about.
So you're going to highlight issues important to you, but are you going to vocally
These are the issues that are
oppose?
important to our district. As I am out in the campaign trail, these are the issues that I hear about. That we need more jobs in the district, that healthcare is still overarchingly the #1 concern on people's minds, because they don't want to go back to the dark ages. I was in Bloomington the other day, and a man was sharing with us that before the ACA, that his wife, who has MS, that her insurance was $65,000 a year. That is not sustainable for anybody. So making sure that we protect the essential health benefits that we have, and then let's make it better. Nobody thinks it's perfect. It doesn't work for everyone, but we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And what people want is someone who's going to go to Washington, D.C. and work for them, and that's me.
I asked that Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, how did they conclude that you were a socialist?
They made it up?
Well, they gave me 3 answers.
Oh.
And they said, because of your support for single payer, I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. We'll talk about that in a second. Late-term abortion, they said, and the Green New Deal. Let's break those down and just give you a chance to address each of those 3 quickly. The single payer issue, you did say was, quote, something to look at down the road. And Democrats running for president, like Jay Inslee, like Senator Amy Klobuchar, they've said that this Medicare X plan, which you, I think, settled on more recently, is the fastest way to get us to single payer or universal health care. It's one where if you like the insurance you have now, you can keep it, but if you want to buy into a Medicare plan, you can buy into it. Democrats right now running for president are saying that that plan, which I think you support, is the fastest way to get to single payer. So aren't you really kind of heading in the same direction either way you cut it?
No, because if you talk to people in the 13th district, people across the district do not want single payer.
Ever?
What they want, we don't talk about ever, we talk about right now, because right now what's at risk is losing their health care and their coverage and their access. And so I can tell you the plan that I have talked about is being able for people in rural and smaller communities where they have lost providers and their premiums have gone up, to let them be able to buy into Medicare in those circumstances and be able to provide some competition in the market. They would still pay premiums. That's the idea, is to make sure that everybody in the 13th district has access to quality, affordable care. But we do not want people to have to get rid of their private insurance that they love.
So help me understand precisely where you're at, because there are a lot of different plans that...
Keep the ACA, make it better, make improvements,
Medicare
let people keep their private insurance if they want it, and use the ability for people to buy into whether it's a Medicare X, if that's what you're calling it. It's a program that we could start in rural and smaller communities that they could buy into if they don't have good access to providers.
And that's the portion that I think you highlighted toward the end of the 2018 campaign.
I think that's
was that
what I always highlighted, Mark. I have never pushed single payer.
Fair enough.
Well,
specifically to the rural communities that could buy in. So my next question was going to be who could buy into this Medicare program, Medicare X, whatever you call it. That wouldn't be, if you were drafting the bill, it wouldn't be everybody that could buy into it, just people in rural communities?
It's in our district, that's where we see the most need, is that people in rural and smaller communities where they have lost providers, there are doctors there, who are, because they're already set up to accept Medicare payments, that they can, if we could start it there, it should bring down the premium cost because it provides competition in the market. And those people would then have the ability to buy into Medicare, paying premiums. It would just be at a lower cost. Let's give them that opportunity. We want to make sure everybody can get to the doctor when they need to, that nobody is going, that nobody goes bankrupt because of the cost of their prescription drugs or because of their premium costs. And so let's figure out a way to get better access.
Access is important, certainly, to health care. One concern raised by a Democrat running for president on the debate stage was that Medicare rate payments are at the low end of what doctors make. So if you bring your insurance to a doctor's visit and you pay so much, the doctor makes this much. But if you bring a Medicare card, you make that much. So doctors will divvy up how many Medicare patients can I afford to see before I start losing money. Do you have any concerns that if more people are bringing a Medicare card to the doctor's office and the doctor's making less and less, that doctors won't start to close their doors or go out of business because they can't afford to stay open?
Doctors have to be part of this discussion. They are part of the discussion of how do we bring down overall costs. And it's not isolated to insurance. It is also goes to increasing our telehealth, right? Because that is an area that here in Illinois we've been trying to expand it. But if we increase telehealth, then that gives better access to more people in rural and smaller communities. We still have to work with the reimbursement rates. But again, this is not a one-shot deal. There's a lot of things that we have to do to fix the system. But number one is we need to make sure that we preserve the ACA, fix it, make it better, and expand coverage for people.
Your opponents are already painting a contrast on the issue of abortion with you in 2020 in this big race, and we've seen the politics change a lot in the last 2 years on this issue, with 6 new states now moving to ban either completely or almost entirely the procedure of abortion by moving the viability standard all the way up to when there's a heartbeat or a pulsing rhythm detectable by advanced ultrasound imaging. Help us understand where you stand on this issue. I believe you're pro-choice. But when is a fetus viable, and when does life begin?
I think the fact that people are politicizing this issue is ridiculous and offensive. A woman's autonomy over her own body is what we're talking about. And I will always stand with a woman's decision for her very own personal body, and that there should not be a room full of politicians getting between her and her doctor.
Since the early 1970s, the Supreme Court has upheld Roe versus Wade, but Congress has not codified that or written that into law. If that vote came up, would you permanently enact a law of the land that put Roe versus Wade as the true law of the land, not just a court ruling?
The law of the land has to be that women have control over their very own personal bodies.
Is that a yes?
That's a yes.
There's also then the question, because Roe has said the state has a reasonable right to protect the life of a mother, and there's a timing issue in there, 24 to 28 weeks of a pregnancy. Republicans are pushing some pretty hyperbolic rhetoric, using things like infanticide or late-term abortions, or even a term I don't think many medical practitioners use, which is partial birth abortion. How are you going to answer those claims that Democrats like you would allow for women very late in pregnancy to go through with an abortion procedure?
Again, a room full of politicians getting between a woman and trying to tell a doctor what kind of advice they should impart to a woman in a horrible situation. When you're talking about these misleading terms, whether it's late term or partial, this is a child who is wanted, who has been planned for, and this mother has received devastating news, and the doctor is sharing with her information that she never wanted to hear. And politicians have no business telling a doctor what he can or can't do to save this woman's life.
So in cases of the life of the mother,
politicians have no business getting between a woman and her doctor. Women are perfectly capable of making our very own decisions about our bodies. Politics needs to stay out of it.
And just to be clear, it sounds like you're saying there should be no limitations on the timeline.
I'm saying politicians should not be getting between a woman and her doctor, period, ever.
Okay, the third item, I want to give you a chance to respond to this too, was on this Green New Deal, which is a bit amorphous and hard to describe. There was like a 40-page press op, really, that wasn't a very specific environmental policy that was put out by Senator Ed Markey.
It was more of like a thought bubble.
Okay, your words there, thought bubble, probably apt description. But the Sierra Club endorsed you, they backed you, they gave you a lot of money, and they helped craft that thought bubble. They helped to write that. Do you disagree with the Sierra Club on the Green New Deal?
No, I think it did what it was supposed to do, and I use that term in a with a positive. It caused people to think, and I think that it has caused a lot of conversation, and they are now addressing climate change and the resulting, and climate chaos that we're seeing in all their committees, because it's not an isolated conversation. It needs to be in all of our conversations, whether it's about national security, whether it's about economic security, that we need to have these conversations about how climate change is affecting those areas and what's coming down the pike. I think the conversation it has started has been very positive.
Connect those dots for me. How does climate change impact national security?
Well, because look, right now, there are certain places around the world that are getting much hotter, where there's now food insecurity, where places are we're not going to be able to grow food, and if people can't grow food, what are they going to do? They're going to move to areas that they can live. And are those safe areas for them? We don't know, but it's going to cause a human migration shift that we need to consider.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that climate change spurs migration, and that it spurs even immigration, really.
All over the world.
Right.
I mean, it's not an us, just a us or them problem. It's all of us. It's our world.
We saw this week a British ambassador to the United States resign his post after calling President Trump stupid and inept. And this is something that has been sort of reported and repeated by our allies behind closed doors, but not yet so publicly disclosed in these leaked cables, which we know were verifiably his words. Can our allies, we saw Iran try to seize a British ship this week. That's the secret, or the long-standing special relationship America has with, it's our closest ally, and we have a hostile actor perhaps testing the strength of those bonds. Can our allies trust this president?
I think that that's a larger question. One thing that has really concerned me is our place on the world stage. That when the president chooses to leave agreements like the Iran nuclear agreement, when he chooses to leave the Paris Climate Accord, that our place as the leader of the free world, that we are moving off stage left. And that spot's not going to stay empty. Somebody else is going to move in. And I think it's important for our allies to be able to rely not just on the president in power at the time, but that there is consistency in these agreements between presidents. And that's the larger concern.
I'd never ask you to name all 24, 25, 26 Democrats that are now trying to run to replace President Trump. There's a lot of them out there. I won't quiz you on that now, but which of the few are at the top of your list? Who do you like so far in this race for president?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot that I like, but I've got to focus on the people here in the 13th district and our race, and we'll let them. We'll follow along and see who comes out.
What did you make of Joe Biden's comments embracing or talking about his relationship with a segregationist senator?
I think that they were probably not very well thought out, and I think, again, I am going to let the presidential candidates have their forums and their debates, and I'm going to stick with the people in the 13th district, and it's fun. It's fun getting around the district and hearing what people have to say.
Certainly. Will we, at any time in this race, hear an endorsement of you in the presidential primary?
I haven't even thought about it, to be honest.
All right. Well, we have a ways to go. The general election, still 16 months from now. Perhaps we'll hear from Democrat Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan a time or two between now and then.
Of course. Happy to come back.
All right.
Are we going to talk about fundraising numbers?
Fundraising numbers before we go. You brought it up. You had a strong second quarter.
Yeah, it was my first quarter back in.
Your first quarter back in, or the second quarter of the calendar year.
Yeah.
You raised about $500,000.
Yeah, a little over.
That's about commensurate with what Congressman Davis raised in the first quarter. This is going to be an expensive race, isn't it?
Well, you know, it is, but I'm very proud of our numbers because I raise our funding from individual donors. And, you know, last cycle, over 94% of the money that I raised came from individual donations that were, you know, from over 43,000 people. And the important word there is people. And that's a stark contrast to Congressman Davis, who last cycle, over 75% of his funding came from corporate PACs and special interests and committees. And I want to make sure that our campaign is fueled at the grassroots level by people across the 13th district, and you know that's been my focus. I'm proud of it. This cycle, I actually took the No Corporate PAC pledge because I want to make sure that people in Central Illinois know that the only people I'm planning on representing in D.C. is them.
A lot of Democrats nationwide are taking this No Corporate PAC pledge.
Yeah.
Will you take money from the DCCC?
Oh, Democratic leadership. Of course, Democratic leadership wants to elect Democrats to Congress.
And they take money
That
from
makes
corporations, from Halliburton, from defense contractors. Isn't that just a money laundering scheme that you can still get money from the DCCC, which came from corporations? What's the distinction?
Democratic leadership wants to elect Democrats to Congress, just like Republican leadership wants to elect Republicans to Congress. The part that I have control over is who I accept money from. And I'm running against a guy who has taken over $600,000 from pharmaceutical and insurance industries and then voted to repeal the ACA. When you want to know who he is taking those votes for, look no further. Follow the money.
If a corporation wanted to give a contribution to you, couldn't they go to the DCCC and give the money there, and then that money could land in your campaign?
No. The money I've taken from Democratic leaders is different than what you're talking about. The part that I have control over is who I personally accept money from. And of course, Democratic leaders want to elect Democrats to Congress. And I am not taking the corporate PAC money because I don't want people to wonder who I'm taking votes for. I want them to rest assured that when I go to Washington, that I'm going to represent the people in the 13th Congressional District.
So the Democratic Party
And Congressman Davis is the one who needs to answer for the funding that he takes. I think last quarter, again, is primarily funded by corporations and PACs and committees. That's who he answers to. I answer to individuals who, at the grassroots level, are propelling our campaign forward.
Should the Democratic Party adopt your position and deny or refuse any contributions from corporations?
I think that's a good conversation to have. Right now, I got to focus on our own backyard and what people in the 13th district want. And what they want is they want somebody to go to Washington and represent them and not the corporations and special interests.
All right, we have reached out to Congressman Davis a few times and invited him on the show, and we're working to coordinate that next appearance, give him a chance to respond in this race that we will be watching very closely. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, we're back in just a moment.